So I want to talk about the light and the vessel. So the vessel will be one with the light, servicing the rider as a horse. Informed by future contents, it won't seek a space between its holdings and the light, like the intestines that will tell us when and how to eat, versus our mind thinking we want to eat that, and then our intestines have to just break it apart and do the trick, The gap where sin can enter will be null and void. There will be no waste and harm. The container for the strong acid, like the stomach or the hydrochloric acid, will not be dissolved, the container itself. So that means the container is stronger than its contents. For example, the stomach is able to be stronger than the acid. Meanwhile, if you put that acid into some vessels, a lot of them would dissolve or melt. So we elevate the body and spirit to the soul, a comprehensive soul with perfect unity of the parts, without grief for the parts that disappear for the sake of the whole, not longing for them, but honoring them and their sacrifice. You might think of like the new teachings, which is that what happens when somebody fasts? Their body starts to eat the cells that are not doing what it's supposed to do, which in other words we say the cancer. So basically, when somebody does fasting, people say that the new research shows that the body will destroy, and I don't mean fasting with water, I mean fasting from food. The body will destroy as fuel the parts of the body that are would otherwise cause problems. So let's talk about Mashiach ben Yosef. And I just want to say we actually thank those parts for their sacrifice. Or if, let's say, you have like a very sad story of 20 people holding hands and there's only room for 19, and if someone would let go, then and this person sacrifices, we can grieve for that part of the whole, the one of the 20. But we say that for the sake of the team, they had to quit their job, right? They quit their jobs so that the other 19 people, because there's only spots for 19 people, holding hands to go into the next section of the competition or the employment. So someone has to go, but nobody could move forward if someone didn't go. So instead of just grieving for them, we actually do the best we could do in the new opportunity. Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben Judah, right? The leader, the rabbi, the rebbitzin, the king, the queen, the prophet, being fully accepted, submitted to. When we break open the mind that is constricted or contracted since the time where we ate the good versus the bad idea, eating, since basically the time when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we stretch to fully accept an unprecedented truth, being observant of the presence and flowing. It relieves the birth pangs because of being past the tipping point of light in the concentration gradient of, let's say, one human. Like as if there was this primordial man that ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and we're all affected by it. And now, when we break open and we stretch past the unprecedented truth, there's no good versus bad. We are observant of the presence and the flowingness of it, being both the flowing. There's birth pangs though with that stretch, and we get past that tipping point. There's no concentration gradient of good versus bad. At that point, we broke it open. The Lubavitcher Rebbe saw and knew that, and could bring the Messianic light, and we can fully be vessels for it and radiate it, because in the Mashiach times, the vessel, which is sourced from higher than its contents. Remember, we talked about the container versus the contents. So the light, right, aka the receiver, informs the transmission of the energy, which is the light. Imagine if I said I can only receive that, and you desperately want to share the light. You will adjust the light frequency temperature so that I could receive it. That's the point, right? For it to be received. And we have to be as open and fluidly available, as frequently aware, conscious as we can. Excuse me. The klipa of the skin organ is semi-permeable, but not just anatomically, cellularly, but spiritually, metaphysically. Touch, feeling, moved, being, like you can feel that these words are also physical. It can happen. Like, see, I'm moved, I'm touched, without actually there being the measurable material contact. It can move it without actually touching it. So this idea of the klipa of the skin, the shell of the skin, the organ as the skin as an organ, it's semi-permeable. So it's like this idea that klipa means something that can allow things in or out. I want to share something from David Michael Levin, The Philosopher's Gaze, page 20. This gaze is always looking for others who are either exactly the same or else predictably, stereotypically, absolutely different. Others whose perceived sameness or difference will absolutely confirm the driving prejudice. This is a gaze then which, being intolerant of ambiguity, either reduces otherness of the other to an absolute identity. This is called totalitarian solidarity. Or else demonizes the other's otherness, making it an otherness so absolutely different that no empathic projection and no recognition of the humanity of the other is possible. We often will call this vilifying someone. They're just so different, or they don't match, that we just make them all bad. So this again is this idea that we're going to get past the bad, the full bad or the full good. And I want to share now this idea of contraction and the birth pangs. And so I was in an Interplay workshop. It's based on Sheila Collin's book, and it's run with Christine Gautreaux and Sheila Collins. Sheila Collin's book is called Stillpoint, and I don't own a copy, but I've heard so much of it read that I would of course recommend it. So when I had to beg for attention, and we write sometimes while we're in that class, or we like talk about it. So it's a workshop. So when I had to beg for attention and plead, convince, eventually I lost the truth of the one I was asking from, that I had to prove or overly request. When we talk about stepping back, letting go, surrendering, to see the power of something more, of newness, of possibility, of another way through. This is that same idea of like getting past the idea of good and bad. Focusing on process instead of destination. Like, oh, it will only be good when I get there. Rather, there's a process. So making goodness in the process. Trusting that there's much more to the journey and the going forward rather than any particular outcome or designated arrangement. We might say this is releasing the attachment to outcome. And self-loved, like not saving overly stingy with myself, but feeling like I create the inner spaciousness where things, including dollars, are not as important as my self-esteem. My self-worth is more than the objects or the money, where I can loosen my grip on inanimate and instead allow myself to be animated instead. So this idea that maybe I was taught that love means spending money on myself or having money, and then like coming out of this intergenerational trauma where if I don't have money, I'm not loved, or I'm not loving myself properly. We could learn it's not bad, for example, to not have a lot of money. This is really something that not just it's a intergenerational trauma, it's a societal trauma. And it depends which country you're in, what people value. If they value eating fresh fish and having a house made of like natural products, if they're clean and they're living a long life and they feel pure and not anxious and comfortable, versus another country may have a lot of money but they spend so much money on healthcare and creature comforts and trying to treat the anxiety and trying to fit in and feel like they belong and have something to live for. And I think you get the drift. So some people will say quality of life is worth a lot more than having money in the bank. When we desperately feel that another person can give us what we need and that they represent everyone else and that no one will ever give to me, like on purpose, they're withholding, that's an area where we could heal. It's called like we have this other who's like the depriver, right? So if somebody just says no about something, we might do what that gaze mentioned earlier. We might vilify them and make it like, oh, they're so power hungry, they never want to share with anyone, they want everything for themselves. We jump to the conclusion someone doesn't love me or you, like doesn't love the person, doesn't love, care, or like me. They couldn't soothe my sadness. They couldn't, from afar, in the way that I want, come to and then coming to resentment rather than trusting them to be doing their best, that they just couldn't show up in the way that I wanted or needed. Or that they're not the only one. They're not the only one, And what does this mean? We can bend superficially when we're trying to be a different person, but when we stand on our own 2 feet as ourselves, like as me, then in firm standing I can deeply bend and therefore bond without losing my footing. And let's talk about one last topic, which is frustration. So when things do get tight or when things are stretching, like what about this feeling of the frustration, right? Or when someone's not doing what we want. So we have to remember, on the one side of frustration, we have exhausted, ashamed. On the other side, we have irritable, overwhelmed. Irritable, overwhelmed is like, and exhausted, ashamed is like depleted and hiding inward. So some of the middle ground that we could sort of find ourselves is that I'm powerless, and you could say this as like an affirmation. I'm powerless to let something out or let something out. Or I'm powerless to let something out or let something in. It could feel like being stuck in a loop. So just when we say that, when I say like as an affirmation, what I mean is like to affirm the state of being. So rather than being consumed by the emotion, we could say, I feel. So we change the I am to versus I feel powerless to let something out or let something in. That's how we get stuck in the loop. We aren't powerless. We can let things out and let things in. So then we can sort of find that affirmation that lets us become free. We could say, I felt I couldn't see or hear myself because I was judging myself, but I couldn't be a present witness for myself. So we could say, I can be a present witness for myself. I can see and hear myself. So changing it to I can, right? I don't have to judge myself. And then finally needing to express what the person is getting affected or impacted, which make them react and not able to hold space in the process. So they could be interrupting, controlling, blocking, running away, etc. And how we have to look at this is that, remember what I mentioned earlier, that the person cannot hold space for us. If we need someone to hold space for us and we need to vent or journal or talk to ourselves or whatever it is, in this way we could sort of make peace with the fact that they don't have the space. They're compartmentalizing all of their stuff. Their vessel is full. They're not growing open. They're stuck in good and bad. What you're saying feels bad to them, right? So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to do another video shortly for Shabbos because tomorrow's already Friday. Can you believe a whole week went by? And I'm going to leave my schedule open tomorrow for things not really like this, but I don't want to deprive whoever might be needing or interested in a YouTube video. All right, bye.